I think we're entering an age where we have to think about, and I don't have a term here, I'm just going to say intelligence or AI-augmented marketing. Where can AI accelerate, better position, better target, better prioritize, break down silos?
Welcome to Margins and Mandates, the show where plays, pivots, and pressure-tested leadership take center stage. I'm your host, Jeff Lortz, former operator, advisor, and founder of the Agile Operator. In this episode, I'm joined by Norman Guadagno, a seasoned CMO and former colleague of mine. Norman has lived through the highs, lows, and plot twists of private equity, cybersecurity, and transformational leadership, including stints as CMO at Carbonite and Mimecast. We dig into what it's really like to step away from a full-time operator grind, why so many PE-backed companies face the same recurring problems, and how AI is rewriting the rules for go-to-market strategy. From 996 work cultures to the so-called death of the CMO, Norman shares unfiltered insights and lessons for any executive trying to drive growth in today's market. This one's packed with candor, perspective, and some humor along the way. Let's get into it. All right, Norman, thanks for joining me.
Pleasure to be here, Jeff. I'm excited to chat and see what we can talk about.
I know I've been looking forward to this conversation ever since our days in the trenches. At Acoustic, we've been in contact, but we really haven't had a chance to really kind of compare notes about the things that we've lived, since then. We both have had some interesting experiences, I think.
Right? For sure. All right. And who hasn't in today's market?
Yeah, for sure. And, I think, you and I talked a little bit about, our motivations. We'll talk about kind of what you're doing now, but our motivations for not necessarily jumping back into full-time operator roles for private equity portfolio companies, because it is a treacherous journey, right? And for a lot of different reasons. And we can talk a bit about our experience at Acoustic, right? As an excellent example of that. I mean,
for sure.
The kind of deals that these guys are doing nowadays are not, for the faint of heart, right?
No one thinks that it's for the faint of heart. In business nowadays, as you know, and it has become really hardcore, and not that it's never been hardcore, but I think even as you read these stories about, I was just reading a story about Silicon Valley, having once lived and worked there. I know that, but now like this trend towards 996. Have you heard of 996? It's now the thing to be doing, even in tech companies and in the Valley, is you work from 9 a.m. to 9 p.m. 6 days a week.
That's a nice way to couch it, I guess. It sounds
and I'm like, wow, that is a definite swing from like flexible work hours and like focus on work-life balance, and it's an interesting time. So I am not signing up for 996. Plus, who can start at 9 a.m? I start at 6 a.m.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I figured the first 9 was how many months of tenure you usually get before they, actually you open.
That also might be the case. That's right. 9 months tenure, 9-week severance, and we'll see you at 6 for a drink.
Yeah, we should. There's definitely a meme there somewhere.
For sure. I'm going to work on that right after this.
Excellent. So tell me, since Acoustic, tell me about, some of the things you've been involved in leading up to kind of where you are today.
Yeah, for sure. And obviously Acoustic, we'll talk more about that, I'm sure, but it was quite an experience. Not only was it a crazy private equity carve out, but it also overlapped the pandemic. And so a lot happened. I ended up personally, I got married during the pandemic. We got pregnant and had a baby during the pandemic. So it was a lot going on in that period. When I left Acoustic, I stepped back for the first time and said, you know what, I'm not sure what I wanted to do. And I had the opportunity right after Acoustic to go and run a media agency for a little over a year. And that was, I knew the owner. They'd worked with the agency for a long time. She wanted to step back for a little bit and sort of reevaluate where she was and what she wanted to do with the agency. So I got to step in and lead a private media agency of 30 some odd people for a year. It was also 5-minute walk from my condo in downtown Boston at the time. And it was great. And it was really refreshing to be in a small environment, privately held, just focus on our clients. But it was also, I realized that, I sort of missed the in-seat, in-house work. And I felt that I got the agency to a good place. We grew, we, restructured a little bit. And so when it was time to sort of think about handing the keys back to the owner, I felt good about that, and she felt good about that. And I got recruited to go to work at Mimecast. Mimecast is a $800 million plus ARR private equity-owned cybersecurity company. I had been introduced to it because at that time, the head of product and technology is someone I knew and had worked with. He introduced me to the co-founder CEO, who I honestly fell in love with, and truly one of the best people I've ever met, period. And so they had an opportunity to, put a new CMO in place. I met with the team and I really liked it. It's a big company, really going through transformation. Ta-da! And so I joined joined Mimecast. And I spent 2 years at Mimecast, and about 18 months into that 2 years, the CEO, co-founder retired from the company, and the PE firm brought in a new CEO, smart guy, definitely had a take on how he wanted to drive things. And it just became clear after a few months that, strategically the vision that he had and that I had as running marketing just wasn't aligned. And so about 6 months after he came on board, I left Mimecast and then decided I didn't want to go back into seat. And so that's how I ended up all of a sudden becoming a fractional and interim CMO and marketing executive, which is what I've been doing for a year now.
So at Mimecast, what was the nature of the transformation? Was it, stalled growth, trying to get it back?
Yeah, it was a combination of obviously growth, private equity invest in things. They'd grown a lot during the pandemic, but then the market changed as people returned to offices and the needs of the market changed. And it was going through a technology transformation too, as the nature of its core business is email security. The nature of email security has been constantly going through evolution, big push around AI as a better way to figure out and block threats in email security. And also just the company historically had been really more of a product and sales-led company, and moving it into both a marketing-led company and a strategic sort of repositioning of the company. And so it was very appealing. And believe me, my 2 years there were incredibly rewarding and satisfying. Great group of people, operated at a global scale, just did a lot to transform how it went to market. And the company continues to evolve, continues to have sort of adjusted its position and made itself set up in a way that it can be competitive in an incredibly competitive space. The thing about cybersecurity, if you know the space, is there's sometimes more cybersecurity companies than there are people to buy cybersecurity. I mean, every day there's a new company in the space because it's driven in so many ways by the malicious attackers who are constantly innovating. And so you have to find innovative ways to defend. That's why there's always great new cybersecurity companies, along with established big players, the Palo Altos and the CrowdStrikes and the other big companies like that. So it's a very dynamic, interesting space, and one that I frankly love.
Yeah, because you were at Carbonite as well before.
That's correct. Yeah, I spent 4 years at Carbonite. We got very aggressively moved from just the data protection space into cybersecurity. We'd acquired it was more of a pure play cybersecurity company while I was there. And so really enjoyed that space because it is a space that has to stay on the cutting edge of technology and has to be able to defend and protect and also is doing something good. So loved my time at Carbonite as well. And that we grew quite a bit there. We did a lot of acquisitions, and then ultimately Carbonite was acquired by OpenText just after I left.
Right. So yeah, I mean, I've had a lot of cybersecurity, CMOs right on the podcast, and there are some very unique aspects, right, of cyber go to market, right?
There are,
one of which is primarily it's a channel model, right?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Very big. Although, interestingly, that was something that at Mimecast, we were very big with the channel, but not as big as some of our competitors. And so we had to continually improve how we engage with the channel. We did a lot of partner marketing. It was a core component of our growth strategy.
And how much of the growth strategy at Mimecast was acquisition related and doing tuck-in? Because sometimes, I mean, but the technology gets out of date so quickly, right?
Yep.
Because of the innovation, right, of the black hats, right? So the only way to stay caught up as a big recognized name is really to grab those innovators, right?
It's absolutely the case. We did 3 acquisitions in my 2 years there, and they were pure tuck-in capabilities, help reposition the company as it expanded away from just being email security to more of a platform for cybersecurity. And that's the nature of the business, right? That's why you saw, a company like Wiz go for insane amounts of money in the market, because there's a need and everyone wants to build a platform. It's why CrowdStrike has grown, but it's also made acquisitions along the way. And so we had to be able to quickly roll in those new acquisitions and leverage that as fast as possible. And that was a skill I learned really at Carbonite, because we just had such a strong team from the CEO and the M&A people there. They were incredibly skilled and experienced at doing it. And you had to learn how to very quickly do the due diligence, identify the opportunity, roll the company in, and make sure that you rationalize the brand story, the go-to-market, and did it as fast as possible to create that value.
Yeah, I mean, it's almost like you're a point solution in the cyberspace. I mean, you've got, the chasm for you is, do you have a way to get to being a platform? Or you're going to get absorbed by one at some point.
Absolutely right, and it is absolutely the model. Yeah. And of course, every company wants to grow and be independent, but the reality is that the dynamic nature of cybersecurity is such that your little company could all of a sudden be thrust into the spotlight tomorrow if it provides the right solution to a new vector of attack. And then you're like, okay, either we're going to grow really rapidly, or we can't manage growth that rapidly and we need a bigger partner. Like, those dynamics are fascinating. I think it's why so many of us like cybersecurity, and why cybersecurity marketing is definitely a thing where people talk about it, and we trade insights, and we look at how we get that. Because remember who we're selling to. We're selling to the most skeptical audience possible, and we're selling to CISOs and others who really have a high bar to get through in order to convince them that you're a good solution.
Yeah, I mean, and the traditional ROI value selling, right, is difficult, right, because there isn't no tangible return on investment. It's like selling insurance.
That's exactly what it's like.
Nobody really wants to buy it, but they have to appeal to other senses other than the sense to have return on investment. And then the differentiation of the technology is so challenging, right? Because it is so technical, right? When you hold 5 of these vendors up against each other, like, how do you really know,
which one is which? Which one has the solution?
Which one is better, right? I mean, because like, how do you do a proof of concept? So, very, very interesting. So talk about so you left Mimecast and decided to kind of hang up your shingle as an independent. What types of companies so far have been kind of in your
sweet spot?
Yeah.
So interestingly, and I don't know that I necessarily planned it, but I knew that just from an experience perspective, I'd worked almost exclusively since I left Mimecast for PE-backed companies. And admittedly, there's a lot of PE-backed companies out there. But the reality is that PE companies tend to couple with transformation. transformation is something I'm good at. Right? I've lived through it. I know how to help drive it. I know how to make those things happen very quickly, and can provide a lot of value in a focused way. I like to think of myself as, for some companies, as I'm working with a client right now, I'm working for them, essentially running their brands and comms, working for the CMO. But imagine being able to have a CMO caliber person who has no desire to like rise up in ranks or take on a bigger job at that business, in seat helping execute. Right. And so it actually appeals really nicely, I think, to the PE mindset of like, get the best people in seat focused on outcomes. And that's me to a T. So I've been working for mid-sized technology companies, really focused on helping them go through a transformation, helping them go through a brand relaunch or a reorganization. I find that that's where I can add a lot of value quickly, helping them assess their marketing organization, being able to help them really see how to build a marketing organization that's going to be viable in 2026 and beyond, because AI is a big force in change and how people perceive how marketing works. I was scared to death, in all honesty, Jeff, like, oh my God, I'm going to go out on my own. I'm going to hang a shingle. What if I can't find any work? But I have been employed pretty much since the day I said I'm now going to go back to be employed as a consultant, and I get to balance my own personal life with the time I give to my clients.
Yeah, and that's great. So in terms of the life cycle, right, of the PE investment, are you typically being engaged early on when the sponsor is still trying to understand what they have, right? And
yeah, interestingly enough, it's actually coming a little later in the cycle with the clients that I've seen.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know if that's just happenstance and this is speculative on my part. Oftentimes early in the transformation cycle, depending on the size of the investment, the size of the company, the PE firms will often have their own, operating partners hands-on, trying to sort of help things. But as time progresses and they put in place a new executive team, as they usually do, that executive team will take ownership of bringing in the people that they need to help execute. And that's when I found that I've been brought in, right? I've been brought in for the most part. That may change, as opportunities arise, by the operating executives of the company, not by the PE firm.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I just happened to meet with a PE firm recently, met with a partner. They're looking for some marketing support across their portco. Introduced me to one of their CEOs. We'll, see how that conversation goes. But for the most part, it's been actually, being brought in by the executives themselves.
And you may not have enough data points to make this assessment, but as you go into these situations at this point in time in the investment cycle of the PE firm, are you finding sort of repetitive problems or consistent issues with the market, or has it been different kind of every time?
Amazingly enough, I'm not only finding repetitive problems, but I'm finding the same problems that existed 5 years ago and 10 years ago. They may have a slightly different form, but marketing tends to, maybe it's sort of the inverse of that sort of old saying, right? Like, all good marketing is different. All bad marketing tends to have the same sort of problems, right? And bad marketing, and I'm not saying any client I work with is doing bad marketing, they're not, but problems tend to arise because there are silos, because marketing is not aligned with the overarching revenue goals of the business, because marketing is not paying attention to the changing needs of their customers. And that's always been the case. And I see that time and time again. And I oftentimes will say in talking with clients or prospective clients, as I've done for a long time, like companies and marketing in particular, but also, tech teams and others, they tend to be very inside out. They tend to think their view of the world is the view that matters. And the reality is that you have to be outside in. It's the customer's view of the world that matters. And you have to reframe yourself to align with that customer view of the world. Right?
Mm-hmm.
It's like, don't say we do X. Right? What you want to say is you have problem Y. We solve it quickly, cost effectively, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And you'd think, oh yeah, duh, everyone gets that. But just key that again and again and again. Companies fall into that trap of, we have an amazing XYZ functionality. And like, if it's not the problem that customers are faced with, it doesn't actually matter that much.
Yeah, and I think I hear a lot of struggle with even defining who the customer is, right? So, and keeping some discipline around, who your customer is and not straying, right, to to adjacent markets or adjacent personas, understanding, defining your ICP and really sticking to it and aligning your messaging to it is a discipline that I think is hard, right, for companies to maintain, especially if they're struggling, right? So
and that's just it, especially if they're struggling, right? Yeah. Because I had this conversation fairly recently, with a company that's trying to decide if it should focus more. Should it focus on a specific vertical or a specific segment as it sells? And it wants to, and it thinks there's an opportunity to, but it needs any piece of business that'll walk in the door because the top line growth isn't where it should be. So how do you balance those things? And that's the trick. And I mean, you could argue, and I won't say it's right or wrong, there are too many tech companies out there. Like, I primarily in the B2B software space and cybersecurity and adjacent fields. And you could say, are there just too many companies all searching for the same dollar? And it's that you could, of course, you and I know, you can trace back to all the investment from PE firms that went into companies and the massive slowdown in monetization or exits from those investments over the past couple of years.
Yeah. So, you could argue that PE firms are keeping a lot of these companies alive, right? That probably are clouding markets, right?
Yep.
And diluting, right, the success of the leaders, right? To some extent, because there is some money. Although in the PE world, this is where I've always found the biggest challenge is, they want transformation and growth, but really there isn't ever like an investment in growth. Right.
Yes.
So,
right.
So, so you can come in and you can transform and you can add new executives and you can change processes and approaches and there's things that you can do, right, as an operator walking in the door. But the one thing that you can't do is spend money on growth, right? Because that's not part of the PE model, right?
It is usually not. And it's difficult, right? So what do you do when it's not part of the model and you want to be able to say, how can I fuel growth or which type of growth should I fuel? And you don't know how to get from here to there. And you see companies, you'll see a company that's one of 3 or to 5 in a space, all competing for the same customer dollars. And of those, let's imagine there's 5 companies, pick your favorite space, right? And there are 5 players that basically, amongst those 5, they probably have 80% market share. One's a clear leader, probably. One's just sort of coming up second, and the other, 3, right? They're sort of battling. But would it make more sense if there were, and by the way, all 5 are probably each owned by a different PE firm, right?
Yes.
And so would it make sense for there to only be 3 players in that space? That would be a growth strategy. And I know certainly, people who are running these private equity firms are very, very smart, and they see this, they know that, but they're trying to figure out how to manipulate this. But as an operating marketer, like in seat or advising companies, I'm like, well, how do we either if we're number 5 in this group of 5, like what is our best play? Right? And that's back to how do you invest in growth? What is the best play?
Yeah, yeah, and the investment model of the PE does not allow for much flexibility in strategy, right? So they're going to either roll you up, or they're going to try to tuck in some assets, right?
Yes,
with minimal investment because they don't want to dilute their investment any further, and see if they can grow through acquisition. They can't do financial engineering really anymore, right?
Right.
Markets have changed. So it's really a tough situation all around, which, ultimately, puts the sort of the spotlight on the operator, right? And asking more and more, right, from the in-seat executives, to find ways, right, to solve that problem when in many cases, right, it's a Rubik's Cube or maybe unsolvable.
Yep, it is. And it's just it's a challenge. But when you're in seat or when you're working with a company, your job is to drive growth, create growth somehow, right? Whatever that may be. And that's usually your job. And so you have to figure out ways to do it. And you have to be really smart. You have to think past the obvious and dig deeper. You have to sort of say to yourself, okay, if we want to get more top line growth, and we've reorganized, we've transformed, and we've updated the product, blah, blah, blah. What's left? And how do you stand out in the market? How do you deliver value that's going to get you to be distinctive in that market? And that can be sometimes it is a really crisp definition of who your ICP is, really clear ways to set yourself apart. You got to figure it out.
I'm going to shift gears a little bit, Norman, because I want to get into the sort of the role of the CMO, right? And more specifically, how it's evolving, and how, AI, is driving, that evolution.
For sure.
Big topic, right? But I know you have an opinion on some of these things, which I'd love to share with the audience.
Yeah, it's man. Over the past few years, the number of conversations I've either been part of or privy to amongst CMOs about the death of the CMO role, it could fill a very big book. Like it's been a topic for a while. And at first, I remember when I started seeing these death of the CMO topics coming up, whether it be on LinkedIn or in private groups that I belong to, I was like, I feel like I'm still have a job, know what I'm doing, maybe not. But then I sort of went to the other extreme, like, wait, it's like, is there something real there? Like, are too many CMOs detached from the actual operational mechanics of a business today? That is revenue. And frankly, there are some CMOs who became detached from the mechanics of driving revenue for the company. And I think that's a critical thing. And then over time, I saw it as, oh, wait, this is not a CMO problem. This is how do businesses overall sort of present themselves to the market? What are their priorities? And what matters in terms of how they engage with customers? And when you peel that up one more layer, we're going to get right to AI. How do people find information about the products they're buying? How do they and so all of a sudden, all these things are actually interconnected. And I think that the historical core way in which a company would market itself, here's what I am, here's the problem I solve, and it's for you, right? Maybe that always remains true in a fundamental way, but I think the mechanics of it have changed dramatically. And people are more informed than they ever have been, by far. And every answer is just a click away or 0 clicks away, as the case may be with AI. And so what we have now is a place where I believe marketing has to do a better job of defining what it does for the company. Right? And I believe it should connect directly to revenue. It should connect directly to being able to to tell a story that matters to the targets. You may have that story surface in LLMs versus surface in Google search, but it's still a story that has to surface. I was thinking about this recently. I just did a little experiment. I was talking to a prospective client, and I just went to one of the LLMs and I said, hey, I'm a customer in this segment looking for this type of solution. What are my best choices? Came back with a list of 5, 6 companies. The company I was talking to was not one of those 5 or 6. And so I said to the LLM, why didn't you mention company X? And the LLM came back to me, and this happened to be Claude that I was using at that point in time. It came back to me and said, great catch. They're not in my knowledge base as of January 2025. And this is a company that's been around for 20 some odd years. But they obviously didn't do the right investments to surface themselves in the places that the LLM was gathering its information. Does that mean they were doing bad marketing? No. But does it mean that their marketing was out of alignment with how their customers are going to be buying in 2025? Yes. All right. And so the job of the CMO is not just to do great marketing, of course, but also to figure out where that lack of alignment may be to what customers do today.
And do you think there's alignment of messaging? Because that's the same thing in the Google search world was, look, if you're bidding on the wrong keywords, right, then you're not going to be found when people are looking for whatever you sell, right? So that was a rudimentary sort of.
It was a very rudimentary version of the same problem, but the problem is a little different nowadays because remember, when you search via keyword, right, you tend to have either a super well-defined understanding of what you're looking for, and you know just how to get it with a keyword, or an incredibly ill-defined version of what you're looking for, and hopefully you put in the right keyword and something interesting comes up. When you interact with an LLM effectively, you are all of a sudden, you're engaged in a dialogue, right? Because back to the example I gave you, I have Claude trained to ask me a bunch of questions when I give it a problem, right? Because I've told it that's my preference. I had to stop it in that particular instance. I said, stop asking me questions, just give me the list. Because I knew if it kept asking me questions, it would have gotten more and more refined. And I didn't want that. I wanted to be the sort of naive buyer. But the naive buyer, right, the representative buyer, but the naive buyer is going through something fundamentally different today. Right? It's like you go to a restaurant and you're in a foreign country. So you're in Japan. I've done this. You've probably done this. The menus in many restaurants all have pictures. And you look at it, well, that looks nice. And you point to that and you point to that. Maybe you'll get something that's delicious. Maybe you'll get something that's not as delicious or not to your taste. Or maybe the server speaks English. And you can have a discussion with them and oh, by the way, I'm allergic to shellfish or okay, well, we can sort of zone you in here. Like the see pictures, click and hope for the best. That was sort of the Google search world to a certain extent. Now we have a server who speaks your language very fluently and can say, well, do you like salty taste? Do you like sweet taste? Do you like, and you can refine it. And so marketers have to think that it's not simply see picture, pick that. Like they're actually, how do you create stories that live in a world where people are going to have dialogues with the technology and surface you at the right point?
So how does that change not just content strategy? Because it's still content that's going to drive.
It is content. Yes, it is.
So how does that change your content strategy, not just from a content perspective, but the placement perspective?
The placement perspective is so key. Where are you showing up? Are you showing up in Reddit? Are you showing up? Actually, Are you showing up in press releases? This is the rebirth of press releases to a large extent, right? As companies think about, earned media getting a really high placement in LLMs. Are you still showing up in Gartner and Forrester? Everyone's like, oh my God, this is the end of Gartner and Forrester. Well, I think it might be a new version of how we think about Gartner and Forrester going forward. So if the best LLMs are learning to be trained on the best material, they know how to think about discounting your own self-promotional content on your site. And remember, we're in the early stages here. They're just going to get better and better.
Yeah.
Right. So are they going to Reddit? Are they going to G2 where there are customer reviews? There's a whole set of new ways that have been important, but now you have to think about, wait, that importance has escalated. And it's not just the how much, but what they're saying and how they're saying it. And I think, and I think this is changing in real time. We have to step back and think about that whole messaging framework. As marketers, we're really well schooled in build a messaging framework, and we know all the component parts of it, and we know how we want to deliver messages to different audiences. And think about, okay, if my ultimate ICP is this, or this, there's an interim set of ways in which I have to position for the LLMs, right? And think about the framing of the questions and the framing of the ways in which I want to appear. Nothing has grown more than, being able to get good reviews. Like, how do I get real, honest reviews from other people, real, honest discussions of what I'm delivering? And that continues to, and here's the kicker. Marketers are also endlessly pummeled by their counterparts inside the company to promote this feature. We got this new stuff. Promote this, promote that, right? And that's attention. Right? And so how do you align all those pieces? And I think that's a challenge for marketers right now.
It's huge. So there's a bunch of different opportunities and threats as it relates to AI for marketers. And I think you talked, I don't want to call it a threat, right? But how do you do, SEO in the brave new world of AI? And I think you're making great points. Is that really the existential challenge of a marketer, or is it, how do I use AI to be more efficient, driving better content? How do I use AI to get better analytics out of all of the different kind of bringing data together from multiple platforms to really understand how I can personalize my message better, build automations better? Like where is the real sweet spot, right, for AI for a marketer?
If only there were a good answer to that. I remember 15 or more years ago when agencies and marketers were calling themselves digital marketers or digital marketing. As if there was this sort of set of things you did for digital versus non-digital. And then over time, just because I tend to be like this, said, please stop calling yourself digital marketing or digital marketer. It's like all digital at some point or another. Even if I produce an event, there's a digital component. Let's do away with talking about digital marketing. I think we're entering an age where we have to think about, and I don't have a term here, I'm just going to say intelligence or AI-augmented marketing. Where can AI accelerate, better position, better target, better prioritize, break down silos? And that can be everything from, as we've talked about, generating content, right? I need my content to be structured this way, and I need it. And here's, all of the metadata that has to be aligned with that, so it'll get picked up by the right engines. Two, and this is something I just happened to have worked on for a client, and to me, it was a very satisfying project. We did a bunch of primary research. We wrote a white paper. We distributed the white paper. It was full of really good insights for the client base. And then it's like, how do you get the sales team to be able to take advantage of that? Traditionally, you enable the sales team with, here's a deck, you give them a webinar, and you say, go out and talk about this. But to me, that's like, that just makes no sense anymore. So I took all the material, the raw data, the white paper, everything else we produced. I put it all into a custom GPT. I also loaded in the brand guidelines and a bunch of other core corporate materials. And then I opened up that GPT to the organization so that if I'm a salesperson and I'm like, I'm meeting with the CEO of this type of company to discuss this type of things, give me 3 insights from the AI white paper that I can share with them and put it into the form of a 1-pager already formatted and branded to send off. So we just redefine sales enablement to a certain extent. It's not having them somehow read that paper and know all the stuff into it, or produce, as we've often done in marketing, 28 different decks. Well, here's one for this vertical. Here's one for this vertical. Here's one for C-level. Here's one for director level. But turns it into teach them how to use the LLM to ask the questions. Oh, I'm meeting with Joe so-and-so from this company. Give me 6 insights, that we think are relevant to them.
Yeah.
And so now that I think of as the sort of AI-augmented marketing, AI-augmented enablement. What about when I come to a website as a customer? Should that also allow me to ask questions? Like if we're entering a 0-click world where people aren't going to even come to your website, if I get them to my website, how can I get them to have an experience that matters to them? I think about this through the lens of, should there be a machine-readable version of the website and a human-readable version of the website? And what do we build? If a machine can read everything and I can get a summary in my AI, what should my website deliver to me in terms of an experience that's unique to me as a human? Those are the places where I think marketing is going to be, frankly, revolutionized.
Yeah. No, it's an enormous challenge. I love talking to marketers more than their role in the organization, because I do think it's the marketing leadership in the company that has the biggest challenge and opportunity, as it relates to what's changing in the world. It's definitely not an easy job, but it's a more exciting and interesting one probably than it ever used to be.
For sure, absolutely, and I think we're starting to see the first sort of wave of real interesting breakthroughs. And I want to be done with the death of the CMO discussion. And I want to focus on how is this frankly, a golden age for the type of marketing we want to be able to do.
Yeah, I love it. So I know you've got a podcast yourself. You want to give it a plug?
I love giving a plug to my podcast. If you are interested, join me at the CMO Reset. You can find it at the CMOreset.com or at your favorite podcast search. And we don't really talk about marketing on the CMO Reset. We talk about, the fact that a lot of CMOs like myself did sort of reach a wall, maybe got burned out, maybe trying to figure out how they play in the new world. And so we approach it with some dialogue around what are the options and why do CMOs need a reset? And frankly, any executive gets a little bit burned out. So I welcome anybody who wants to listen to the CMO Reset.
Awesome. I'll put it in the pod description as well. Norman, really great catching up. I think it's good that we didn't go back and look too much at the past.
Yes, indeed.
I think it's good to look forward. Right, is really the best way to think about life. So, great insights. Appreciate your time. Love to have you on again, maybe in a few months. And
love to do it, Jeff.
What else you got going on?
Oh, absolutely. Thank you, Jeff. It was a pleasure.
All right. Take care.